You are listening to Radio Aula Mundi.
Hi there, wherever you are. I'm Marco Rixecker, a freelance writer, reporter, producer, teacher, translator, tour guide, poet, singer, and songwriter. I speak several languages, and I'm the creator and founder of Radio Aula Mundi, an evolving podcast station where no language and all languages are spoken. It's a multilingual mix of music, poetry, lectures, languages, interviews, documentaries, recipes, and a lot more, co-produced with the students of the Aula Mundi International Cultural Center. You can find us on radioaulamundi.bandcamp.com, podcasts.apple.com, Spotify, YouTube, Breaker, Player FM, Facebook, search Radio Aula Mundi. The following narrative includes excerpts from a collection of testimonies and interviews entitled Let's Talk About It Anywhere in the World, where it is all about people's voices, accents, and speech patterns, hand in hand with my own personal anecdotes and observations. In addition to that, people are free to introduce themselves and speak their minds openly in their respective, often indigenous, languages and dialects, without any paraphrases or expectations. So, let the story go on from there. Becky Webster is a Native American writer, food activist, and educator. She teaches at the University of Duluth. The first time she appears on my radar screen is when I hear her voice discuss controversy and conflict between the Oneida nation she belongs to and a nearby small town by the name of Hobart. In this case, the issues involve land ownership and the use of land. They are closely related to her food activism because of the destructive effects of industrial agriculture on the environment, whereas the indigenous way of living off the land involves sustainability and spirituality. That's what Becky Webster focuses on as a traditional farmer and food advocate. The appearance of reservations, commodities, boarding schools, and food deserts have made Rebecca's efforts to restore ancestral farming practices and healthy lifeways an uphill battle against disease and depression, which are still too common in Indian country. So, food sovereignty has become a major component of the indigenous renaissance. Becky Webster's contribution is a new book that motivates me to reach out and ask for an interview when it gets mentioned in the podcast I hear her voice in for the first time. It is entitled Our Precious Corn and explores the history of Oneida white corn through indigenous storytelling. A week later, Rebecca and I are chatting online from different places in the world. From the start, I feel privileged to listen to Becky Webster's voice introduce herself in her indigenous language, Oneida. It is the traditional way of mentioning your name and those of your kin and clan.
Sure. Sagoli swagwek, ganyata gay loon yungyets and gwehwene. Becky Webster Nyungyets op slunige, wagwahoni wagita load, oniot aga ni wagahuanjot, dolunkawane ni wagenyu. So what I just said in English is, greetings, my friends. My name is Ganyata Gale, which means snow scattered here and there. My English name is Becky Webster. I'm Wolf Clan, I'm Oneida, and I grew up near Duck Creek that runs through the Oneida Reservation in Wisconsin. And like a lot of us, I wear a lot of different hats. I'm currently a professor at the University of Minnesota Duluth in the Department of American Indian Studies. I focus on a lot of different things. My favorite focus is on food sovereignty. We are one of the founding families of a co-op here on the Oneida Reservation in Wisconsin, where we grow acres of our heirloom indigenous white corn together. My husband and I also started our own farmstead here on the reservation, where we have 10 acres, where we focus on traditional varieties of corn, beans, squash, tobacco, sunflower, sunchokes, berries, fruit trees, nut trees, and all that kind of fun stuff. And we recently, I think it's actually, we're going into our second year now. We started a nonprofit to educate the community and our Oneida citizens and extended community members about our foods. It's called Ungwakwa, which literally means our foods, to help people learn about our indigenous foods and how to care for them.
At first, I focus our conversation on Rebecca Webster's indigenous ancestors and forefathers, as well as some of the old stories that she would remember.
Which languages do you speak?
I am a first language English speaker, and I am a learner of my indigenous language, which is Oneida.
So what do you call yourselves?
Oneoteaga,
And what does that mean?
the people of the standing stone.
So where does that come from?
My understanding is back in the day, the Oneida people, we always had a large stone that was near our villages. And when we moved, some say the stone came with us. Others say that a large stone appeared. Others say that we knew that that's where we needed to be because a similar stone was located there.
What kind of a language is Oneida?
Linguistically, it's called Iroquoian. It's in the Iroquois language family. We call ourselves Haudenosaunee when we're speaking to other people. Internally, we say Yungwanasunee. That literally translates to "we all build a house." It's talking about the confederacy of the tribes that are in the Yungwanasunee people.
Rebecca Webster's book focuses on corn, and so does the next part of our interview, with specific details, such as its significance for the Oneida Nation and beyond, as well as its daily use as a food item.
What makes corn so precious?
The whole book is talking about why our corn is precious. The word literally has two meanings. Yungwanasti means our precious, and it means our corn. So the book talks about how throughout our traumatic history of colonization, assimilation, and removal, corn has always remained by our side, bringing us back to our language, our culture, our traditions, our history. And she has been a constant teacher and a reminder of all of those things that are so very important to us.
Are we talking about a corn man or a corn woman here?
She is definitely a corn woman. She's one of the three sisters, corn, beans, and squash. And we think of corn, like many cultures, not as something inanimate, but we think of her as our relative. So we have that very close relationship with our corn and some of our other foods.
What makes Oneida corn so special?
So I think that's a really big question. We all have our corn that is unique to our places. This corn has been developed to live in our area of the world. It's actually not an Oneida corn, it's a Tuscarora corn, which is one of the tribes that's in our confederacy. And this one particular corn is just one of the types of white corn we have. We have a stuffed up nose corn. We do have an Oneida corn. They have different growing seasons. They have different lengths on the cob. They have different number of cobs on a stalk. But this particular corn, Tuscarora white corn, is widely known because it's so versatile. She has really big, really long cobs. Our corn has 8 rows around, and she's a flour corn, sometimes characterized as a flint corn, which that's a whole nother discussion. But she's very versatile. So we use her to cook in our soups, our breads, our mush, and just again, because she's so generous with her, the amount that she produces, and she's very versatile. So that's why I think that type of a corn is the most common that we grow.
At the moment, what is your favorite Tuscarora white corn dish?
Oh, I'm having a hard, it depends on what you're in the mood for. I really have to go back to the classics, I guess. It's our corn soup. And that's a soup that clearly isn't indigenous because pork is one of the main ingredients in there. So there's smoked pork hocks, beans, and corn. And that's really just what makes up our soup. And I think that for me, because it has so many childhood memories of 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 that particular dish. And and I love to make it. People say I make it pretty good, so people enjoy when I cook that for them. But I do also, I really haven't met a corn dish that I didn't like.
How much of a family recipe is that?
I think it's our community has a recipe, and that's pretty much what it goes in. We actually joke when we talk to our relatives. So the Oneida people are originally from what's now New York State. So like for example, one of our other tribes, the Mohawk, a lot of folks there, when they make their corn soup, they put all kinds of vegetables in it. So we kind of joke around about what kind of soup is this and why are you putting turnips in there? And, so different communities put different things in their soup.
If you wanted to go back to 100% indigenous before the arrival of the Europeans, how would you substitute the pork then?
Deer, turkey, we were any of the wild game that you have around. And we also were avid smokers. So we did have, smoke houses, and I understand we use the empty corn cobs to smoke a lot of our fish and our meats to preserve them for the times that we didn't have them, or just, in fact, just to preserve them or to have a different flavor in our different dishes.
What have you made today so far?
Oh, today I didn't make any. I made corn soup yesterday. So that I did use my hands for that. We make our corn a lot of times ahead of time and we dehydrate it, that whole nixtamalization process. We do that because that's lengthy. For ceremonies, we might do that the day of, but if we want to recognize the convenience of things, we'll do that ahead of time. And we do that by using our hands. We use our black ash baskets for corn washing. So we'll get the corn cooking in the ash water, and then we'll rinse the corn to get the hulls off by using our hands in an emotion to rub them up against the sides of the basket to remove the hulls. So that's one way that I see that we use our hands quite a bit when we're cooking our corn.
Stories that are passed on from one generation to the next may also include recipes for dishes and delicacies such as white corn soup. They make me hungry, and not just in a physical sense. So we move on to Rebecca Webster's biographical background. I'm curious about her being a self-described language learner, which includes the culture as well. As part of the latter, homesteading and going back to the old ways of living off the land without exploiting it have become central to Rebecca's life. Just talking about it gets her emotional because it has been such a long and deep process of reckoning.
How did it all begin?
So this was actually the first book I wrote, and they came because of the way that they printed out, or the way they went through that publishing process came out different. But so the book that you're talking about is called In Defense of Sovereignty, Protecting the Oneida Nation's Inherent Right of Self-Determination. And before I was a professor at Duluth, I was an attorney for my tribe. And that book came out of all of those lawsuits between the Oneida Nation and the village of Hobart, really centering on them wanting to control how we use our land. And for me, that was a pretty dark time in my career. And it was one of the main reasons that made me want to switch careers. And during that whole switching process, I was also getting into gardening and getting into growing our traditional foods. And the gardens and the foods and the corn and all of that were really healing for me. So when things got pretty stressful, either in the community or, at work, or just, people in my family passing away, I went to the corn as a way for healing. And it naturally grew into, we need to write about this. And in fact, I was recruited for my position at Duluth because of my history in working and talking about intergovernmental relations between tribes and local governments. And that's what I previously published. And, with academia, you have to publish our parish. And I wanted to write about our corn. And I was really nervous about it. So I went to our department chair and I said, I really want to write a book about our corn. And I had all of these reasons why it was so important from a sovereignty perspective, from a land perspective, all of that stuff. And before I could even say anything, she said, do it. And I said, really? Okay, I'm on it. And so I did. And then I set out to gather these stories from our community members and from, the archival records and was able to weave this story together to talk about how corn has been with us.
So what are you really proud of?
Oh, I'm really proud that these, oh my gosh, and I'm going to cry. that my seed mentors have trusted me with these seeds and they're growing here. So our people had to lay down so much just to survive. And a lot of us had to forget about those seeds. They had to sever those relationships with our relatives because they were in survival mode. The boarding schools took away our children and they told the children that they needed to eat these foods. They needed to wear these clothes. They need to act this way. Allotment took our land away. So when we had no land, how were we going to grow our foods? So to know that these seeds are finding their way home and that we're able to provide a place and our soil here is pretty bad. So the land that we bought used to be conventionally farmed. So we have to heal the land as we're healing ourselves. And I'm really proud that these seeds are growing for us, even under these conditions. And they are so generous, and that our community wants to learn about them and our community wants to grow these seeds themselves. So I think that's what I'm really proud that we're able to create this space for these seeds to come home and for people to trust us with those seeds.
Rebecca Webster is sitting in her living room during our video chat. And from the start I've noticed the corn cobs hanging on the furniture behind her. So I asked her to describe the 4 varieties of corn that I see. It tells a story about variety and diversity that is an additional treat as part of our conversation.
Please tell us the story of the corn that's behind you.
Oh, so we have 4 different varieties of corn that's behind me. The one here is Oneida white corn. So this is a shorter cob than the Tuscarora white corn. And this is likely one of the corn that is historically significant because our people fed that to George Washington's starving army during the Revolutionary War. The one right next to that one is called Degunda Dale corn, and scientifically, this is likely a cross-pollination, but our cultural teachings are a little bit different. And what happened is I had a field of Iroquois black sweet corn that I was growing, and it's a very small cob, and then there were a couple of very large cobs that were out there, and when I finally came time to harvest, they were this calico corn that was behind me. And our traditional teachings say that when something like that happens, it's the corn is recognizing that they are all related. North and South America, all of our corn is related. And so when you have a cob that's very different than the rest of the cobs in your field, it's that she is remembering her relatives. So that literally means the women are remembering the other women. The corn right next to that is a Mohawk red flower corn, and this is a corn that we grew. She has beautiful husks on her, so that's especially why I like this corn. I make corn husk dolls, and her husks are all of the shades of our people. So I like to make our corn husk dolls with these as where their faces are because they represent all of our people. And then on the far side there is Haudenosaunee blue corn, and that's another flower corn. And that's actually the type of corn that we're going to be growing here mainly on the farmstead this summer. It has ceremonial purposes, but it's also a really good mush flower corn.
So, Rebecca Webster lives on a reservation that is also a tourist destination, including for non-natives. It makes me curious about her interactions as an indigenous subsistence farmer with visitors who are just passing through.
What kind of feedback are you getting from your non-native neighbors?
So we have our gardens, our main gardens with the Three Sisters right out on this road. It's not a busy road, but we get enough cars. And when we're out there, because we're out there quite a bit in the summer, people will slow way down as they drive by and just really look really hard. And sometimes people will stop and roll down their window. We've even had people get out of their cars and ask us, what are you doing out here? And so, because it looks very different. It does not look like a conventional farm because it's not. And we've talked with a lot of people and said, well, this is our way of farming. This is the way we do things. And I think it turns into a really great teaching opportunity.
Again, Rebecca Webster is an author and teacher. But she also used to work as a lawyer. And as an indigenous woman, she might end up being a knowledge keeper one day. She is learning a great deal about her cultural traditions just by listening to the elders. So she knows how to tell a story. And one of my questions about that triggers an exchange that goes way beyond the lands of the Oneida Nation and their historic allies. It takes us all the way to the Pacific Northwest, which is where a story, the beginning of which I share with her, comes from. There are creation stories and travel memories about Ecuador and South America. As part of this dialogue, Rebecca Webster is also going to read excerpts from her book, Our Precious Corn.
How much of a storyteller are you?
It's a collection of stories. We start off with our creation story, and I did look in a lot of our historical records, some stories that Oneida people gathered from each other in the 1930s and 40s. And also I did over 50 interviews from our community members here in Oneida to share their stories. So all of those voices of our Oneida and other Haudenosaunee people are woven throughout this book. And I talk about our creation story. I talk about contact. I talk about our other different stories in there. So I really shied away from and didn't include, things like the archaeological record that said when we moved here or how long we've been cooking corn or those different things, because I don't think that that's really overall relevant to how we perceive ourselves and the story that we want to share with people. Because according to us, corn was brought down from Sky Woman when she fell through the hole. And then corn grew when her daughter died and the different plants grew from her body. So that's my perception of history.
How do you reconcile science with spirituality?
Well, I think science will tell us things, but at the same time, science is always, we're finding out, oh, just kidding. No, we've actually been here longer. Oh, wait, no, here's a new discovery. And I think it's depending on how you use it. So oftentimes people use science and use those archaeological records, the pottery shards and the ash and the carbon dating to somehow prove that we have less of a claim to this place, that we are also immigrants ourselves, or just some other thing that they are trying to use that information for that really isn't helpful in the larger scheme of things. I think the lessons that are woven through our creation story are a whole lot more important. Okay, so this is, I have lots of stories in here, so it's very hard to choose, but I just opened and here's one. So one of our good friends, Don Sharnon, he retired from Junhenqua, and that means life sustenance, and that's the Oneida Nations. Here, our government grows the corn too for the people. And he worked there for a long time and retired. And he's also one of the members of our white corn co-op. And he was describing a harvest time where the community was invited to come and harvest. And he's talking about explaining seed selection to a group of kids. So here's a story from Don. He said, then there was a circle of these young people, and as they were taking the husks off, we added an opportunity to not only reveal the all soup grade corn, but to actually find a seed grade cob that is worth saving and putting aside for using for next year's seed. I said, if you do find a cob that is better than the rest, and I mean longer, and it doesn't have any other colors in it, doesn't have any dents, and the rows are straight, and there's 8 rows, then we need to save those. If you find one of those, let us know, and we'll put them in a special box over here. So this one kid, I could tell right away he was a competitor. He was anxious to find one of these special cobs. I saw him digging around and he was still doing the job, but he was cherry picking certain cobs. He was trying to find the cob. He opened one up. He was sitting in the chair and he was looking and he says, oh, he opened it up really slow. And then he stood up and he held the corn in the sky and he said, this cob is legendary. Everybody was cheering and all his peers were cheering and saying they wanted to find one too. It was such a great moment. I will never forget. Whenever I hear the word legendary, I will always see him standing up with his cob in his hand, like it's the sword in the stone and like he just pulled it up out of the stone, up into the sky. It was awesome. Those were some golden moments on sunny days under a big tent in a circle around a big pile of corn.
As part of the Indigenous Renaissance, where are we at right now?
We have so much to learn. My husband and I were just outside today getting some of our garden areas ready, and we're just, we're keep saying we're missing something. I wish I had, somebody to ask how to do this. But there's so much that we don't know and that we have to relearn. But we're just glad that we are doing that so that somebody who's coming after us doesn't have to work so hard to find that information. And also we both grew up here on the reservation, and we didn't have access to a lot of this knowledge that our 2 daughters are now growing up with as a natural part of their lives. Like their language is there, their songs are there. I mean, they may act like they don't want to talk about our foods because they're teenagers, but when we overhear them talking to other people, we know that they're listening and they get it. So we're part of that generation where our kids are not going to be embarrassed or shamed for not knowing this stuff, because there is a lot of shame because people assume, well, you're Native American, you should know this. You live on your reservation. How come you don't know how to do these things? But again, you have to look at our history and see what was taken away from us to know why we don't know them. And it's not our fault. And we are doing all that we can to try to pick those things back up again and again, so that people behind us, it's not so hard for them.
Please tell us a story about your ancestors.
Oh, I have one about my great grandma. Let's see if I can find it. I probably can. So what is happening in here is my great grandma, she was actually the last one in our family to grow our corn. She was the last one. And she was with this man named Stan Sr. After my grandfather had passed on, my great grandfather had passed on. And so it was a memory. I don't quite remember it. I kind of remember it because I was just a small girl. So my mom is telling me this story. So here my mom shared a story about Stan Sr., how he lost his eyebrows. So this is talking about the humor. So and this is my mom saying this story, during my grandma's later years, she lived with Stan Webster Sr. Stan's whole backyard was a giant, long garden. He grew all kinds of vegetables, including white corn. During Thanksgiving one year, my husband went hunting, so I took my daughter to Stan and my grandma's house to eat. My Auntie Faye, Uncle Jim, and Auntie Lyons were also there. When we got there, my grandma was telling everyone about an incident with the corn soup. While she was cooking in the house, Stan was cooking over a stove in the breezeway between the garage and house. When he went to light the stove, he turned the knob before he had the match ready, and there was a gas buildup. The flame went up so high and so fast, he burnt off his eyebrows. Grandma must have been upset and worried afterward, because whenever she walked past him during dinner, she would remind him to be more careful and lightly smack him upside the head.
In the beginning, the mountains thought they were people. So how does the story go on from there?
Oh my goodness. In the beginning, the mountains thought they were people? We have stories about mountains and how they were made, and they actually tie back to our ceremonies, and they all deal with corn and the different ways that you serve corn. So the mountains themselves, I don't know that we necessarily considered them people, but that would be interesting if they thought they were people to have those thoughts. They must be animate. And I think that's another thing that brings us together, also has differences, to think about the world around us as animate or inanimate, or as their relatives. So if we start off with the corn, well, I mean, the mountains, would the mountains be male or female? I think that would be an important distinction. I don't know. But I think the way that the mountains came to be was during the creation story, when the left-handed and right-handed twins were fighting. Yeah. I think the mountains thought they were people. And in thinking so, they became people. I'm not quite sure how to match those things other than what I know. And I don't know. How would you finish that story?
In the beginning, the mountains thought they were people. In the beginning, the trees thought they were people. In the beginning, the rocks thought they were people. In the beginning, the rivers and lakes thought they were people. In the beginning, animals thought they were people. Someday, they will say, in the beginning, human beings thought they were people.
Oh, that reminds me of our Ganahela, which is our Thanksgiving address, where you look at all of the things in creation, and people have a tendency to think that they are superior, they are at the top. But in our Ganahela, we recognize we are but one small piece that is in all of creation, and all of creation has a responsibility to each other. And if you take corn for the example, if something happens to when the fish run, that can affect when we're able to plant. And if the seasons are off, that can affect how we can plant. If, the trees haven't, gotten to that budding stage yet, we're really not supposed to plant certain things at that time. So everything gives signals. It's our clock. It's our a way to tell how healthy the world is around us. And the most that we should really do is to respect that, or stay out of the way, instead of, trying to dominate and oppress that. So I have a quick story to share randomly. We took about 20 of us from Oneida here, and we traveled down, I think it was about 5 years ago, to Ecuador to visit with the indigenous corn farmers down there. And we traveled the whole country for a couple weeks. It was really fun. So we're still kind of relatively new to growing our corn and really exploring what all of this means to us. So we may or may not have smuggled some of our corn into the country. And we were in one of the communities. And of course, we have to talk through a translator, who has to talk through a translator to speak to the local folks. And we were describing how we process our corn. So we said, here's our corn, and we need to get ashes in a pot. And we were describing it. And, it takes a couple hours. So basically, you cook it in this ash water for an hour. Then you rinse it off really good. And then you put it back into some clean water and probably cook for another hour or so. And we're describing this whole process. And an elderly woman in this community was, just kind of patiently watching all of this. And then toward the end of when it was done cooking, she looks at us, and of course, through a translator, she says, Yeah, that's how we process our corn too. We were just, oh, yeah. We thought we were sharing some deep cultural teachings with them, but no, throughout North and South America, that's how people process their corn. It really is something that is quite common amongst the indigenous peoples of both continents.
So how much do you have to think before it's all right?
Yeah, right. Exactly. So, but even when I see those things and I see the data and what those scientists are telling us, I still go back to, well, in our creation story, this is what happened. And, they can both exist at the same time, I think.
Eventually, I move on to the final part of my interview with Rebecca Webster. It is something special I have prepared for the occasion, a legacy of another corn nation, that of the Maya civilization in Central America. It's the so-called Book of the Maya, the Popol Vuh, which Rebecca Webster is going to read an excerpt from. Her performance will lead to another exchange of comments, statements, questions, and answers between me and her, leading to the creation story of the Oneida Nation. And I would love to hear more stories, even after my recorded conversation with Rebecca Webster. She and I will be in touch for another chat, anytime, anywhere in the world. And the story goes on from there.
All right. So, Sagoli, hello. My name is Becky Webster. I'm a citizen of the Oneida Nation in Wisconsin, and I'm going to read an excerpt from the Popol Vuh, a Mayan creation story. Over a universe wrapped in the gloom of a dense and primeval night passed the god Harukan, the mighty wind. He called out earth, and the solid land appeared. The chief gods took counsel. They were Harukan, Gukumats, the serpent covered with green feathers, Biakak, and Shmukani, the mother and father gods. As a result of their deliberations, animals were created, but as yet man was not. To supply the deficiency, the divine beings resolved to create mannequins carved out of wood. But these soon incurred the displeasure of the gods, who, irritated by their lack of reverence, resolved to destroy them. By then, the will of Hurakan, the heart of heaven, the waters were swollen, and a great flood came upon the mannequins of wood. They were drowned, and a thick resin fell from heaven.
How much Oneida creation story do you see in the Popol Vuh?
Obviously, our stories talk about creation. We were created out of clay. So that's what human beings are made from clay. But the creator took a bit of his mind and put them in us, a bit of his blood and put them in us, and then his breath. So, but the conflicts, the destruction, that's throughout our story also. About creating everything around us, that's in our story too. And we also have actually in the when we're still in the sky world, this last part, they were drowned and a thick resin fell from heaven. We have part of the creation story when the sky people are still in the sky world, and Sky Woman is about to be married to Haudenosaunee, and he tells her to go back to her village and instructs her to tell everyone to take the roofs off of their houses. And they're like, we should do what? But that's what he said to do. And so they do. They take the roofs off of their houses. And then a big storm comes and they're getting nervous because the storm is getting bigger and bigger and closer. And out of the sky, all of a sudden, it rains corn, and corn falls from the heavens into the homes. And that was a gift from Haudenosaunee to the people to help them sustain themselves.
Postscript. As part of my conversations with people, I often have them ask questions, either specifically for someone I know I'm going to chat with in the near future, or broadly for anyone I might speak with anytime, anywhere in the world. As a result, several questions are available for Rebecca Webster. and some of her answers will allow me to ask her a follow-up question occasionally. The first question comes from an Ojibwe writer, author, and storyteller, a woman by the name of Marie Bertineau.
What do they see as the value in learning a second language?
Oh, I think there's a whole different world opens up for you where you see things in a different way. For me, I'm obviously still learning my language. I've been trying to learn it for probably 30 years. But as you break down the words and what they mean, and not just their like the literal translation, but how they're woven together and how they come to be, you get a glimpse of a whole new worldview because of the way that those words are put together. It's something that you can't really get just by simply describing it in English. You have to see how they come together to be able to perceive things in a way that you're not accustomed to.
The next question comes from a woman by the name of Ellen Jones. She is a British literary translator and lives in Mexico City. And she is curious about borders.
I would love to ask them what their understanding of borders is.
So I don't think borders are the same as we see them now. And in fact, we have a wampum belt. Wampum belts are a way that we record, treaties, agreements, understandings, principles. We have one of them that's called the one dish, one spoon. And it's just one dish with one spoon, and it's meant to, because it's a spoon, it's not a knife, and it's not anything that would cause harm or hurt anyone to cause any bloodshed. And the idea is that everything around us is for all of us to share, and that we are all need to be mindful and only take what you need, of course, but that if somebody comes and they're hungry, that we're going to feed them. So I think that our principles of the Haudenosaunee, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, is that we wanted to extend the rafters of our building, the one house, to anybody that wanted to come and take shelter, anybody that wanted to agree to not have war and to embrace the principles of peace, peace of mind, love, and power. So any of the tribes, and we have had tribes that did accept that and come under us. The Tuscarora, of course, is the most common one that people refer to. So as far as borders go, we didn't really think of them the way that we do now with lines and stakes in the ground to say whose is what, because we all wanted to live here peacefully and coexist.
So, what corn dish would you welcome me with?
Oh, well, if it was a surprise dish, it might have to be a fast one. Maybe some corn mush. That's a good one. That's pretty basic and could whip that up pretty fast. I don't know that we have necessarily a single dish that we would welcome people with. We do have practices where we would where people, it's called Edge of the Woods ceremony, or just Edge of the Woods, where a visitor who's coming into our territory would light a fire at the edge of our community, and then we would send some people out to go and talk to them and find out what their intentions are. And if their intentions are good, then we would welcome them into our community. And of course, then we would feed them.
Then there is a question Mark Panic asks. He is a Chicago-based musician, singer, and songwriter who wants to know how we can overcome our differences in this day and age.
Have you subjected yourself to people with opposing opinions from yourself? And other than family, and if you have, how do you bridge the gap of communication?
Well, I think you start with food. You start with a shared meal. I think by breaking down those barriers, and that's one of the things actually that the peacemaker did when he was going through the communities to form the Haudenosaunee, to pull the people together, is he went into a community and he said, men, go out and hunt, bring the game back. The women harvest some food that's in your fields, cook it up, and then you're going to cook together. then we're going to share a meal together, and then I'll share my message with you. So I think it's getting people to, talk together again, getting them to visit and socialize. And what a way to do that other than, through food, because food is a pretty safe way for us to gather and have discussions.
How would you have communicated with each other when there were so many different languages?
Well, I think people, they are similar enough that even today you can still understand them. Some of the words might be a little tricky, but you get the overall concepts about what they're saying. But I think we also have to think of we lived in a different time. Not everybody on the planet spoke English, right? So people had to learn multiple languages, especially if you're going to be traveling to different communities. And I think that ability was passed on through families, or if you didn't know it, you stayed with the community until you were able to figure things out and you learned.
The last question for Rebecca Webster comes from India, where a musician and climate activist by the name of Sukrit Sen wants to know what she does about global warming.
One question that I would like to ask them is that how do you use your profession, or how do you use, if at all, your art or your writing, music, whatever, to advocate climate action? That's one question I would love to ask. And the other is, if not, like, what is the challenge that you have faced so far? Because I'm sure you've had a feeling to convey messages. So if you haven't, what's the reason behind it?
Yeah, so we do a lot here. One of the things that we want to get away from more is tilling. So we try to till as little as possible. And most everything here is done by hand. So we work up our garden spaces. We use the mounds that we plant our corn in, corn, beans, and squash in these same mounds. We don't use any herbicides or pesticides. We fertilize with things like fish. That's what we had traditionally fertilized them with, compost, ash, or what people are calling now biochar, just our traditional practices that we have done for a long time. We also are doing a lot of environmental restoration here on this property. I had mentioned it was in very poor shape when we got it. We had soil tests and you determined that it's been very depleted from the conventional farming. So we're planting lots of trees. There was a drainage area that came through here, and we actually dug it out to make it a pond, so the pond would be able to, sustain life, have, fish and frogs and all kinds of things in this area. So by, I think, trying to restore this to a place where people and animals and the plant life can cohabitate, I think is just one small thing that we can do to try to help, and to do so without the use of chemicals. That because we recognize that when we put those things on our foods, we're going to turn around and eat them, which is just, I don't know why anyone thinks that's a good idea.
How can you or your actions save the world?
Oh my, that's too big of a thing. I don't know about that. I think maybe it's just if everyone just slowed down a bit and just really thought about their actions and what they're doing, and to see the reasons why we do things, I think we would be in a much better place. I don't know about saving the world, but we would certainly be in a better position if we could be more mindful.